So good morning and welcome to this update on the funding of programmes for adult learners, and this is an Ascentis webinar in association supported by e-Memoir. Session is going to be led by Beesh Kaczmarczyk this morning, and as ever we like to keep these webinars as interactive as possible for the benefit of you, the participants. So feel free to use the question or chat facility at any point throughout the duration of this webinar to share any questions or thoughts. And for those of you watching on the video recording, if you have any questions or thoughts, then the contact details for Beej and also the team at Ascentis will be available on the final slides. And I would encourage you to get in touch. I'd also encourage you to share these slides among your colleagues and use them to perhaps provoke some discussion and some thought. And if there's anything else that you'd perhaps like to see the team at Ascentis cover, then please feel free to get in touch with them and they will always be happy to help. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Beesh Kaczmarczyk and I'll mute my microphone and I'll say, keep the questions coming. Thanks, Beesh.
Thanks very much, Marek, and good morning to everyone. Sorry for the short delay. I was in a different room from the rest of you, so that just tells you something about my technological skills. Let me just give you an indication of what we're going to cover over the next 55 minutes or so. I'll be looking at the range and scope of provision funding through the adult education budget and advanced learner loans. And obviously this is in the context of programmes that are being delivered in England. And at the same time, we're going to pick through some of those elements that have either there's a little bit more clarification in the most recent version of the guidance, but also there were some minor changes. And I do want to stress a little bit particularly about the use of learning support in both the adult education budget and advanced learner loans. Apologies, by the way, for the three-letter acronyms. This makes it easier, but I will be obviously describing each one in more detail. I also want to pick out, this is very much in response to Ascentis centres and other colleagues that have asked me to just clarify the funding for English, Maths, ESOL and digital skills. Obviously, this is for 2021 to 2022. And at the same time, to highlight some of the new adult entitlements, the role of the National Skills Fund, what this means, for example, for the adult level 3 offer in terms of things like skills, sector skills academy, sector skills provision, and also other sort of, if you want, initiatives, particularly around traineeships, which have got implications for us for 2021-22. And all the way through, I'm going to be asking you these questions as centres and providers. What does that mean for planning and delivery of programmes for adult learners in whatever context you find yourself? If you're a college, a local authority provider, a third sector provider, or obviously an independent training provider. All of these have got consequences and implications for the way in which you deliver adult learning. So with that in mind, let me just sort of remind ourselves of the two primary sources. Although there is a new kid on the block called the National Skills Fund, and I will talk a wee bit about this, but essentially the adult education budget's been set at the same level in spending plans for so many years. Obviously, we're very keen to see what the spending review in autumn of this year says about the future of the adult education budget. I'm a chair of a medium-sized college, but also the chair of a private training provider, and we clearly have been making representations to the ESFA, to the Department for Education, to rethink the adult education budget, because although there's been an underspend, and that's regularly reported, particularly in light of what's happened over COVID and the anxieties we've got about what's going to be the tolerance that's going to be applied to the adult education budget from the ESFA. Currently, that's been set at 90%. So if you, as a provider, fall below that 90% of your contract, you'll have to make up the difference. That'll be taken off you. Previously, with COVID last year, we had a 68% target, and therefore, if you achieved over 68% of your contract, you were given 100% of your funding. Already, we've had a divergence from the national, what the ESFA is planning to do in terms of the devolved and delegated AEB in Greater London and the mayoral combined authorities. One thing I think that is clearly a big aspect of our representation is look at all the reductions in the number of programs available for adults, and also the reduction in the number of adults actually attending some form of learning post 18. And that particularly is worrying around English and maths, where we know there are still significant numbers of adults with low levels of literacy and numeracy. What's interesting, obviously, is the whole of this has changed in the last 2 years, with just over 50% of the total adult education budget now being devolved to local authorities in the form of what we call mayoral combined authorities, such as Greater Manchester, West Midlands, Liverpool, the North East, etc., and also delegated to the Greater London Authority. And so those are very important players in determining what their particular priorities are for adult learning, as well as the national entitlements, which are still there for English, maths, and of course the new national entitlement for digital skills. But even within those different contexts, there's still quite a lot of subcontracting of adult learning through the AEB. So where a main provider such as a college or a local authority subcontracts aspects of delivery of adult programs to other providers, and that still goes on. But there is a significant review, and obviously you'll be seeing the results of that of the consultation in the next few months on the rules relating to subcontracting, the extent of subcontracting, as well as all the things that we're already aware of in terms of things like disclosure of your subcontracting and the rationale for any subcontracting. The other thing to note, by the way, this is particularly important for those of you who have got procured contracts. So this doesn't cover, for example, colleges and local authorities. But if you're an independent provider, and since November 2017, there have been procured contracts from the ESFA for adult education budget funded programs, all of those learners must complete their learning by the end of this July. So there will be no new starts on those old procure contracts, and there will certainly not be any continuing learners beyond the end of July for any procured contracts. This doesn't apply to grant funded providers such as colleges and local authorities. Just note that, because that's quite important in terms of completing. If you've had a procured contract where you've gone through a procurement process and you've delivered different aspects of adult learning, that those learners must complete by the end of July. Just something to note. The other main source of funding that obviously this is very important for those of you delivering Ascentis accredited access to HE programs is advanced learner loans. That facility has been set at just under £500 million, but there is evidence since 2013-14 of a significant underspend on loans. There's been a fall in demand in most age groups other than the 19 to 23-year-old age group, which obviously are not using up their entitlements, or they've already got the equivalent of 2 A levels. And there's also been poor take-up of learners from disadvantaged communities where loans are not an attractive way of financing the fee that they have to pay for a course. So there are still problems of learner acceptance and the availability of information to tell people what the benefits are of taking out a loan to finance your level 3 and above learning. What is also notable is when colleges took up a significant proportion of loan funded provision, now it's the private providers, the independent providers, that are increasing their share of the loans market. So this is raising issues about if loans haven't been successful, considering you've had over £1 billion underspend on loans, then maybe we need to look at alternative ways of funding adults who want to learn at level 3 and above. And that's obviously part and parcel very much of the agenda that's part of the white paper, and now, of course, the bill going through Parliament. So those are the two primary sources of funding. AEB, as you know, funds what we call the legal entitlements, which have been extended beyond the English and maths up to achieving the equivalent of a grade 4 to 9 GCSE, and now adding to that, of course, essential digital skills, as long as those learners are doing it at entry and level 1, and they've been assessed at being below those levels. And as well as significant provision for the unemployed, and this I'll pick up because that's one of the big agenda items given what's happened with COVID. For those learners that are not covered by an entitlement, not covered by a low wage, then we assume that those learners will fund a proportion that's up to 50% of the basic price or cost of any individual learning aim that they do. or qualification. But also to remind ourselves that, and again, this is if you're using Ascentis to support you here, is that there's the availability of programs that can be delivered in the workplace, things like the legal entitlements, English, maths, essential digital skills, as well as other programs that might help people, for example, to widen their interest. This obviously is not to be confused with apprenticeships and other forms of statutory training, which learners might have to do. And I think I want to just add traineeships. Traineeships extend from 16 years old up to 24. And just to remind you, the legal entitlements for first level 2, which is equivalent to 5 GCSEs, and the first level 3, which is equivalent to 2 A levels. And always check with Ascentis whether the program that you're following with Ascentis does qualify as a first level 2 or a first level 3. Access to HE clearly does, but that's only for 19 to 23-year-olds that haven't already achieved their first full level 2 or level 3. Traineeships extend beyond the 23 to 24, and these are fully funded for any 24-year-olds, particularly for their core activities such as the work placement, etc. So there are requirements to make sure that any learners that are going to be fully funded, then you've got to make sure that the assessments are correct, for example, for pre-entry programs, and that the other credentials of those learners, such as their age, is correct, 19 to 23. They haven't used up the first level 2 or first level 3. And similarly, if they are unemployed, you know, you've got to make sure it's complying with the unemployed, the definition of unemployed, that's in receipt of universal credit or what do you call it, different forms of support for unemployed learners, including the ESA, but also to make sure that if you're using the low wage waiver, which I'll just reference in a few minutes, that you've got evidence that that person's wage is below the threshold level. So we've got some significant aspects here of learning that are funded by the adult education budget, but also the adult education budget funds activities and aspects of learners in terms of their support. So if they've got a learning support need, such as dyslexia, low levels of literacy, numeracy, a disability, then clearly you can draw down learning support for any adult that's on any of the programs. In other words, they're an eligible adult on eligible learning aims, as well as discretionary learner support that will often cover things like hardship, childcare and residential costs, but these tend to be tested against some criteria that you apply. They're not necessarily universal entitlements. So you can see that the adult education budget pays for the education and training of adults, as well as the support for those adults to make sure that they stay in learning. So if you're using the AEB, and I know that most of you listening in today are providers that will have AEB contracts, whether it be through grant funding or through procurement, then you know that you've got the freedom and flexibility to deliver the programs that adults need, want at local level, and that can include qualifications, Ascentis qualifications, as well as in some cases non-regulated learning, non-accredited learning, where you've got some freedom to offer programs, particularly at pre-entry or entry level, where a non-regulated approach, particularly in terms of return to learning or what do you call it, preparing people for a regulated program is a good approach. But there's a lot of local flexibility built into this, which of course is an added dimension if you're operating in a devolved area such as Greater London or Manchester, etc. So there are some sort of key things that that the AEB is used for, and that freedom and flexibility also means that when you've got funding coming from the SFA, if you're, for example, outside a devolved authority, or if you're operating in a devolved combined authority, and some of you will be operating in both. For example, we have learners that who are funded by the SFA nationally because they are residents outside of a combined authority such as Greater Manchester or Sheffield City region in future. But to make sure that right across the piece, whether you're operating in a devolved combined authority or nationally with the SFA, the national entitlements, the legal entitlements, the first full level 2, the first full level 3 for those who are 19 to 23-year-olds, English, maths, and essential digital skills are national entitlements. So you cannot vary those entitlements, although you can vary the rate of funding for them. For example, Greater London has done that with some aspects of the entitlements, but they are also fully funded, or they're always fully funded, irrespective of where the person's resident in England. But for you to comply, it's not only an age factor, it's not only have they not got the equivalent of 5 GCSEs or 2 A levels, but also that the qualifications that you've got to offer them, in other words, the learning aims, have got to be ones which are recognised as a full level 2 or a full level 3. And again, that's information that's available in your organisation. It's available from the ESFA on the hub or on the learning aims reference system, as it used to be called. It's got a different name now, but also check with your awarding body such as Ascentis. It's also important to note that that extension of an entitlement is to also fully fund. In other words, these learners do not have to find the tuition fee, the 50% of the cost of the course. For those learners who are 19 to 23 who are unemployed, right? So that's very important. And that condition applies even if they have the equivalent of a full level 2 already. So there is an implication for you. I think there's one big market that all providers should be looking at, which is adults who either are fear of being unemployed or unemployed because of, say, COVID or whatever, or because of a change in structure in their sector, who might want to retrain at level 2 that you can obviously fully fund. So there's a barrier to their engagement removed. That, by the way, does extend beyond the 19 to 23 age group to include those aged 24 and over. And therefore, you've got quite a significant number of people that you can start to deliver to because of either the right age group or because they're unemployed. And that extends to all those learners who are 19 and over. The other point that I did reference before, and again, this is something to remind yourselves, is that this will be the third year in which we've operated what we call the low wage waiver. Now, the low wage waiver is not an entitlement as opposed to as the above are, because again, it's up to the availability of resource in your organisation and obviously from the ESFA or the combined authority. But essentially, those learners that can prove, and by the way, for next year, because I'm thinking about your planning for 2021-22, who can prove that their annual gross salary is less than £17,374.50, you can decide to fully waive their fee. So in other words, they will become fully funded. So you won't be drawing down a 50% of the funding through the formula and the 50% of the basic funding through a fee. Now, that means you use up more of your allocation because those learners would be 100% funded, and therefore you would use up more of your allocation. Now, by the way, the low wage waiver in London and some of the other combined authorities such as Greater Manchester is actually higher than that. And that's something to, again, to recognise if you're operating in a devolved area. So hopefully that's giving you some idea. Thanks for the couple of questions that I've picked up so far. I think it's also important to recognise that what this means is that when you look at the legal entitlements, and I'll come back to those, you are aware, of course, that Ascentis does offer the first level 2 qualifications, that the size of a full first level 2. It also offers the first full level 3 in the form, for example, the access to HE diploma. But remember, it's for those age groups. So the learners have to be that age when they start the programs 19 to 23. English and maths, as I said, for all those learners that haven't yet achieved the equivalent of a GCSE, grades 4 to 9. So think about, have you deliberately gone out and targeted adults, including adults in the workplace or adults who work in your own organisation that have not yet got the equivalent of a GCSE, and then you can offer them either a functional skill, a GCSE, or if their levels of literacy and numeracy are such that you might require something that requires a stepping stone qualification, again, use a stepping stone, or in some cases, it'll be non-accredited if it was very much at pre-entry and entry level. But of course, make sure and check with Ascentis that this is eligible to be funded and it's current. Of course, what's new is the essential digital skills qualification at entry and level 1, which is also part of that entitlement. Whether you're operating in an ESFA funded situation, that's nationally, or it's through a devolved authority, these are the statutory entitlements that cover the whole of England. The key thing here to note again is the conditions that are attached to including the essential digital skills. We've already covered in a previous webinar, but always check out with your colleagues with our colleagues at Ascentis. Now, what's different in the new guidance, version 1 of the new AEB funding rules and the AEB funding rates and formula, both of these documents are available on the ESFA website. They came out in May. And what they've done is they've broken down the contribution tables. In other words, this tells you who's fully funded and who's co-funded, or in some cases loan funded, by age. So it's the 19 to 23 age group, which includes, by the way, the 24-year-olds who are on traineeships. And it just has some notes to just, again, to re-emphasize some of those entitlements. So have a look at that at your leisure. But you can see, for example, the advanced learner loan is available for any learner that's basically 19 to 23 who's already achieved a full level 3. So they might have the equivalent of 2 A levels, or they might have a national diploma. So for example, if you find that a 19 to 23-year-old presents themselves next year to do an access to HE course, but they've already got the equivalent of their first full level 3, then they will have to take out a loan, even though they're in that 19 to 23 age group. Similarly, you can find that ESOL learners, which is a big aspect of our provision. I know many of you, again, if you've got an unemployed ESOL learner who's 19 to 23, they'll be fully funded. Or if you use the low wage waiver, then they'll be fully funded. Otherwise, they're co-funded and they've got to find 50% of the basic cost. So you can see all the entitlements there for the 19 to 23s. Look at that at your leisure. But also you can see that there's a separate table now for those learners who are 24 and over. And for example, you'll see that if you look at the essential digital skills, it makes no difference what age they are. As long as they're over 19 and over, they're always fully funded, including the 24-year-olds. If they're doing English and maths, fully funded, again, irrespective of their age. But when you start to look at who's fully funded for a level 2, again, they would only be fully funded if they were unemployed or if they're on a low wage, again, using the low wage waiver. So you can start to see that that slight distinction between the age groups just clarifies through the notes some of the things that you might need to be aware of. So make sure, again, that the implication of these changes in the way in which the rules and the rates and formula are presented are there to help you be clear and avoid any problems in future. Local flexibility is the one area where I think we've seen most opportunities to design bespoke, locally designed learning. It can include qualifications as well as non-regulated learning. This is usually to support learners at entry and level 1 who are not ready to do their first full level 2, so 19 to 23-year-olds. Or it can be used to retrain and upskill learners who've already got a level 2 or above, but need something different because they're switching from one sector to the other, as well as refocusing or restarting a career if they're unemployed. So you can, and again, Ascentis will help you because it tells you which of its offer do qualify under the local flexibility, and it does that on the hub as well, but always clarify. Now, in some cases, those learners will be fully funded. In other cases, they'll be co-funded. Again, it all depends on the age of the learner and their circumstances. Clearly, if they're unemployed, then they would be fully funded. The qualifications and units of qualifications, which are specified on the hub, also include aspects of ESOL. If you decide to do non-regulated learning, for example, at pre-entry or entry level, where you think that the start point for the adult has got to be something that's less, perhaps, onerous, less challenging, then again, use non-regulated learning. But again, with advice from Ascentis, make sure you've got RARPA in place, that's recognizing and recording progress and achievement as part of your quality assurance. And again, guidance can be provided on how you design learning outcomes and how to make sure that those learning outcomes have been achieved so that you can build the adult learner's confidence towards achieving maybe a regulated qualification. So this is just a reminder of the local flexibility. Again, don't always assume that something under local flexibility will be fully funded. That's what that particular point that I'm making there. It can cover a range of learners, particularly entry and level 1, as well as those who are wanting to retrain or reskill, who have already got a level 2. And you can use it alongside the legal entitlements. So an adult can have several learning aims, some which are funded under the national entitlement, essential digital skills, some which might be funded under flexibility, ESOL, or some that might be funded, such as an employability skills program, whatever. But this can include a range of different types of learning, non-regulated and/or qualifications. So you can have a learner doing a non-regulated pre-entry program, maybe an ESOL, but also they could be doing a regulated entry level, employability skills or some other type of program. So again, I think that's a very important aspect of the way in which adults are being supported through the AEB. And I think they can certainly be used much more to increase participation. Now, add to that arrangements in devolved authorities such as Greater London, and you'll find that there are some wonderful opportunities to engage with learners, maybe who are furthest away from learning or are rethinking their career options, etc. So if you are using non-regulated learning for any one of those purposes that I described there as community learning, independent living skills, or employability and labour market re-entry, always make sure that you check the eligibility principles. I've already said this several times in previous Ascentis webinars to make sure that you're not just simply replicating what there is in terms of the learner's experience. You're not just replicating a regulated qualification by running something as non-regulated learning, and it is not above level 1 entry or level 1, sometimes level 2, but certainly not above level 2. I think that the key thing about the essential digital skills that are not basically at entry or level 1 is that there is obviously, we know that quite a lot of essential digital skills, we know that quite a lot of ICT programs are no longer being funded at entry and level entry 1 and entry 2. Now, I think we've still got to make the case to say, well, there is a demand, I think, for pre-entry essential digital skills, and certainly Ascentis has got something in its offer there. If you want to find out more, have a chat with any one of the colleagues that will give you details at the end. But I think that it might be, Jenny, a battle that we might have lost. It's very difficult to see that decision being reversed. In terms of formula itself, the formula is not changing. So each adult learning aim, so if an adult picks up more than one learning aim, for example, they say they're doing a pre-access course and they do some study skills, some employability skills, maybe a short introduction to that particular area, such as teaching, health and social care, plus they might be doing GCSE English and maths. Each one of those learning aims gets its own weighted rate. That rate will either come from a matrix or from a designated list that gives you no flexibility at all. We then take account of the learner's disadvantage, i.e., are they a resident of one of the 27% of poorest of postal codes, which indicates a level of deprivation. And then we multiply that by the location of the provision. So if you're in Greater London or in the Southeast, there will be what we call an area cost uplift. And all of these are contained within the funding rates and formula for next year. No major changes there. Rates also don't change depending on how you deliver the learning. And this is critical. With COVID, and I know that many of you as providers have increased the proportion of learning that's being done online, you're using remote learning, blended learning, then I think what's very important to note is that the rate of funding for an individual learning aim is independent of the means by which the learner does the rate learning. So if it's classroom-based, it's the same rate. If it's totally delivered online, it's the same rate. And if it's by blended learning or a mixture, it's the same rate. Now, what is different is that up to now, we've been using what we call the 2015 Index of Multiple Deprivation. For next year, this is in line with what we're doing with 16 to 18. adult education budget index of multiple deprivation will be 2019, and that will be used to determine the disadvantage uplift for any individual learner. Now, in about 80% of postal codes, it makes no difference, but there'll be some postal codes which no longer draw down any uplift. There'll be others which do it. So just check out what those changes mean for you next year if you're recruiting learners from any of the postal codes where there's been a change either one way or the other. The earnings methodology is still the same for each learning aim, not for the learner, each learning aim, 80% of the funding is attached to retention on program, and 20% is to achievement of that particular learning aim. If the learning aim was a traineeship, then 20% will be attached to, for example, the functional skills in English and maths, maybe a short employability skills program. 20% is also attached to the work experience. So the rules that determine that they've achieved the work experience include things like getting a job, moving on to an apprenticeship, or just completing the number of hours that the work experience element of the traineeship was. Those learners that are not entitled to be fully funded, we expect them to find 50%, and that's the assumed rate of any unweighted rate. That's before we start taking account of whether the program is a humanities-based program, business studies, or which have got low weightings, and the high weightings are attached to things like engineering, construction, catering, hospitality. The other thing to note, every single learner is eligible to be funded under the AEB is also eligible if they disclose a need or if you assess them as needing learning support, and that can be claimed at £150 per month, depending on how many months you provide the support. And if in any month you need to go beyond that or need to increase that beyond 150, then you can claim the additional, and I'll show you how to do that in a few moments. So these are the rates that are going to be applied next year, no different from this year. So again, you can see that if you're doing, say, a 72-hour program in say humanities, it's £450 if the learner is fully funded. If the learner, by the way, is not fully funded, then that rate becomes £225 that the ESFA or the combined authority pays you, and £225 that will be the fee that we assume you charge the learner. Now you can charge the learner less than that, the same as that. That decision is up to you. You'll see over here that for these qualifications, such as A levels, GCSEs, functional skills in English, functional skills in maths, there's a slightly different rate. Functional skills in IT, access to HE have got their own individual listed rates. So if you're doing, say, access to HE in, say, teaching or in health, that would be weighted at B. Each of the different subject areas is its own weighting. And that learner, who, if they're 19 to 23, fully funded, would be £3,384. You would earn 80% of that if they were retained to the end, and 20% of that if they achieve. Now, we had a question earlier from someone that was new to funding. It says, is the achievement 20% added on to that 3,384? No, that 3,384 includes the 20% achievement funding. So clearly you can see that you could lose if a learner completes an access course but doesn't pass it. Then you could see that you lose 20% of 3,384 if it was in health and social care or teaching. So, or nursing, for example. So these are the rates that were set for next year. English, maths, ESOL, and digital skills slightly different, and I'll just pick those out with you. GCSE English and maths for adult age 19 and over are actually weighted at B. This is an incentive for you to deliver English and maths GCSE to adults. £811 for English, £811 for maths. That's up to the point at which they then, if they then achieve levels, grades 4 to 9, that's the end of the entitlement. So in other words, a learner could have two entitlements. They could, say, come in and do functional skills and pass it at level 1, and then do a GCSE and pass it, say, at grade 5. But each one of those, because they didn't have a 4 to 9 yet, would be fully funded. The functional skills in English and maths are funded at a lower level, that's £724, except for entry-level maths, which is funded at that higher level. And that's an incentive to try and get learners at least through that level. And it recognises those additional costs. The ESFA will fully fund any adults on the day that they start their ESOL learning where they're unemployed or in receipt of a low wage waiver, which is your choice. That's your discretion. Otherwise, ESOL learners, as you know, are co-funded. If you need to offer ESOL in more hours than the qualification rate tells you, as long as you've got evidence that those additional hours are being done by you, then you can record those and get more funding than the qualification rate. Again, for anyone that's not attended one of our ESOL events, again, our colleagues will be able to explain how that works. But of course, the key thing here is it's recognizing that you're putting more hours on than the listed rate is actually giving you, for example, for speaking and listening, etc. Now, a question from Monica: can we use learner support to fund small classes where individual learners need individual support? No, that is not learner support, that's learning support. If you want to do that, you must have evidence that those individuals have got their own individual additional support needs, learning difficulties and/or disabilities, so that you would be able to run the class, but only with a smaller group of learners. And that would then be compared to what would be what we call a standard class that might be doing that same element of study. Now, so in other words, Monica, you can, it's what we call the small group size factor, but ask, send me an email separately and I'll explain how it works. That is learning support, not learner support. Initial assessment has got to be done. It's got to be thorough. You've got to have proof, and you've also got to have, for audit purposes, evidence that a class would normally be much bigger for that if those individuals didn't have that individual need. You can't just use it because you haven't recruited enough learners in the first place. That's the answer there. The other thing to note is that the ESFA fully funds those individuals who are employed. I had a colleague who said to me, I'm sure that Essential Digital Skills National Type only applies to those people who are unemployed. No, it's anyone aged 19 and over, as long as they're assessed at below level 1, and that's part of their legal entitlement. It will also fully fund non-regulated essential digital skills. So they've got to be mapped to the essential digital skills standards for learners, including those assessed at pre-entry level who have significant learning difficulties and/or disabilities, or where the assessment shows they can't undertake the provision identified in the paragraph above. In other words, at entry and level 1. So that's a bit of clarification there. And again, that should provide some opportunities for you and some things for you to consider in future. So, and the last thing I just wanted to add is that, in case you haven't picked up, this is how it works. Let's say you've got an entry level 3 EDSQ at 50 guided learning hours. The rate is £300. We know that, that's the weighted rate. Program length is 3 months. On-program funding would be 8% of that, which is 240. The achievement funding would be 20%, which is 60. You earn a double on-program earning in month 1. So in other words, although it's 3 months, we call it 3 + 1, which becomes 4 months, and you get 2 of the months in the first month, second month, third month. That's how you earn the 240. You can see how the implications of this is if you don't retain the learner beyond month 1, or if you don't, in this case, this would be a short program, you have to retain them for at least 2 weeks. If you don't retain them, say in month 2 and 3, you've lost the on-program element in both months as well as the achievement element. So that's just to sort of clarify how that retention and achievement works. I mentioned learning support for adults. All adults are entitled to learning support as long as you've assessed them or if they've disclosed it. And that's available to all, including learners doing English, maths, and ESOL. We still have some centres that say, well, ESOL learners can't get learning support because they're all, no, any learner with an individual need can get learning support. The fixed rate is £150 per month. If you need to pay more than £150, then as long as you've got evidence of costs for audit purposes, you can claim that through what we call excess learning support. And that's done by a management information team through a thing called the earnings adjustment statement. So just be aware. Now, this, by the way, is exactly the same methodology which we use for those that are loan funded. So if you've got loan funded learners, it's exactly the same rate, £150 per month. And you can claim more than 150 if you've got evidence of actual cost being higher than 150 in any particular month. A couple of words then about loans. Now, if you look at the loans guidance this year, and version 1's out, actually, there's not a big change in advanced learner loans in terms of the rules, the regulations, etc. We know they're available to those learners who are age 19 and over on the first day of their learning. We know they're not means tested, but they're only available for programs. And again, check with Ascentis which of our level 3 programs are available to be funded by loans. The extension goes right up to level 6, by the way, and the loan must cover the whole cost of the learning aim. In other words, to deliver the learning aim, including assessment. And basically what happens is that the learner takes out a loan with the student loans company using the information you've provided on the nature of the course, etc., and then the student loan company pays you. And it's 100% paid on retention. There's no achievement element for each month that there's evidence that the learner is still active in learning after what we call the reference point. Now, the loans, if you've got a loans facility, that will cover the cost of loans in terms of covering the cost of education and training. It's also important that you have what we call a loans bursary fund facility, because that covers any additional costs, such as, for example, if the adult has got learning support needs, £150 a month, or if there's a hardship issue such as childcare, etc., etc. Now, I've got some real doubts about the future of advanced learner loans, partly because of the relatively low take-up that I mentioned, but also because of the National Skills Fund offering a lot of adults over the age of 24 who haven't yet got their first full level 3, which that could mean, for example, access to HE, the opportunity to be fully funded without having to take out a loan. So what is the future of advanced learner loans, given that there's also a review of qualifications at level 3 and above, and also we know that there could be some changes in higher education funding, and as well as the introduction of the lifetime skills guarantee. So there's a lot of, I think, that things that you've got to watch, certainly over the next year, which I think will have implication for advanced learner loans. And I know those of you who are using Ascentis to accredit your access to HE programs, you also know that any adult can take up to 4 loans at the same time or consecutively, but only one of them can be for access to HE. You can still take out 3 others, but it can't be for another access to HE program. And you've always got to make sure that any learner that comes along to you is 19 to 23 who's wanting to take out a loan, always explain to them, yes, but have you got the equivalent of 2 A levels? If you haven't that, then we should really direct you to the AEB. And by the way, if you've not got a contract to deliver AEB, but you've got a contract to deliver loan funded work, you've got to make sure that the learner is then referred to the National Career Service, who might then find an appropriate provider for that adult who's 19 to 23, who hasn't yet used up their first full level 3 entitlement. You do not complete the loan application, that's not allowed. You direct the learner to it. You say fee for that access to HE program is just over £3,000. Here's how you can fund it. It's up to you to put that application to be funded by a loan. Again, the loan funded programs, you've got to be an eligible learner. The program has also got to be eligible to be funded by a loan, and you can check that out with a hub or with your colleagues at Ascentis. Similarly, just remind yourselves that any access to HE learner who then successfully completes an HE program can also have their access to HE loan year written off. So again, that could be another reduction in debt of 3,000 or so. As I said, that's 100% paid on retention. There's no achievement element. And as soon as the learner withdraws, they're completing the level 3 or above program, then the loan will stop, the student loans company will stop paying you. Just a couple of other things to note, by the way. If there's any point at which you've been getting loan funded income in, and we find that that learner is entitled to have it fully funded, then you as a provider will have to repay any funding that you've been drawing down through the student loans company. So just a clarification of things. What's different is what I want to just highlight now. Adult learners in England are not just funded through those 2 primary routes. There are variations, which I think you've got to be aware. partly in response to, although the National Skills Fund was there before COVID, but certainly because of COVID and the COVID, what we call recovery measures, there have been some other investments in adult skills. Now, the National Skills Fund was basically the government's attempt to say, look, we've got to reorientate a lot of adult learning towards the needs of a very fast changing labour market. Not just about COVID, but about moving technologies, what Brexit might have as an impact, etc. So various aspects of this, 2.5 billion investment over 5 years. So we're now into the second year of it. Now, actually, a lot of the National Skills Fund has been used to fund COVID skills recovery measures. So it's not being used for that longer term, it's being used in the short term. But the key drivers were things like the lifetime skills guarantee, which I'll talk about in a minute. But you've also maybe come across the skills boot camps. These are sort of shorter 12 to 16 weeks programs, very much tied up with engineering, construction, digital skills in construction, plumbing, etc., where the learner gets a very intensive program, which then means that they can reorientate themselves to a new job, etc. So it's been targeting those people that are obviously at risk of unemployment or are unemployed. And basically, it even uses a different funding formula from what we've just described to you. So you do be aware that there are things happening in the world of adult skills and adult learning that could have ramifications for all of us, including those of us funded through the AEB and loans. The Kickstart scheme is one good example. It's a £2 billion scheme to get about 300,000 plus 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit or at risk of long-term employment, to give them at least a 6-month placement where the employer is paid a subsidy in the form of the wage for that 6-month period, but also the employers were paid in effect a signing on fee, which would cover the cost of PPE, administration, etc. I know some of you have come across the Kickstart scheme. Big issue is, where do learners go after they've had their 6-month placement? Do they go into an apprenticeship, or do they go into AEB funded provision? Because they will obviously, it's not mandatory to complete a qualification while on the Kickstart scheme. So there's going to have to be a follow-up in terms of what that means in terms of progression. Also to note, and there was a different scheme before the 1st of April, but from the 1st of April this year, any employer that takes on new apprentices has been receiving a £3,000 incentive payment, irrespective of the age. Originally, it was a higher payment for young people compared to older apprentices. So you can see that the government is putting money in to basically deal with problems of shortages of skills, as well as where there's dangers of unemployment. There's been a significant investment in traineeships, which I'll pick up with you in a minute, and other support measures such as bring more money for sector-based work academies, expanding the work and health programme, and putting more resource into the National Career Service. So again, if you're a provider, a college, local authority or independent learning provider, you might find yourself going, well, we fund some of our adult learning through AEB, some of it through advanced learner loans, and then we've got these new kids on the block, such as a National Skills Fund, which also funds activity with adults, but sometimes slightly different models for how you become an eligible provider, etc. So I think one of the things about all of these rules, and if you've got any individual questions, what I'll do is I'll pick them up outside of today's webinar. So particularly with respect to ESOL. But be aware that these are the major changes that are occurring. Sector-based work academies, which I know some of you might be involved in, this is basically working with Job Centre Plus, which again becomes an important partner with you in terms of funding for adult learning. This can last up to 6 weeks, 3 elements: employment training, which is funded through the AEB, work experience, and guaranteed job interview, which is funded by the DWP. So this is helping employers in key sectors such as logistics, engineering, construction, health and social care. The jobs are there, the unemployed learners are not ready to go into them. And that's what these sector-based work academies are doing. So local flexibility funds the pre-employment training. For example, you could be doing an Ascentis employability skills, usually lasting 2 or 3 weeks. And then the DWP funds the rest. Again, referrals will come to you through the Job Centre Plus or through a local authority, etc. But they're very often in response to the demand. For example, in this year, the current year, 2021, they're being added on to your allocation. But again, I think these sector-based work academies are an indication of how the government intends to plug skill shortages in key sectors using a range of devices, placements, apprenticeships, sector-based work academies, AEB, etc. But they're all competing for employers to be able to provide the placements and, of course, the jobs. How many of you, can I just check with a show of hands, how many of you are currently offering sector-based work academies as part of your adult offer? Just have a quick look at the hands. Brilliant. Oh, that's good. Yeah. About a quarter of you. That's good. So again, what happens after the person's gone through a sector-based work academy? Hopefully, they'll come to you as an apprentice, and you'll be able to pursue that learning with them even further. Level 3 adult offer is also funded out the National Skill Fund, and this has got quite a lot of implications for a lot of the things we've already talked about, particularly loan-funded provision. It's part of the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. Any learner who has not yet used up their level 3 entitlement, who's over the age of 23, can be fully funded. Now, the validation rules, by the way, but basically they've changed them. So you can see if they want to pursue their first full level 3, equivalent to a technical certificate or 2 A levels, they're able to access them. But this is the key thing. They've got to be in one of those 400 courses, slightly more now, in sectors where there are clearly high value earnings or there's skill shortages. So engineering, health, social care, science, ICT, the life sciences, etc. They've all been identified. In each case, you're not only getting the national rate off that table, but also it's being uplifted. In some learners, it's about £600. Depends on the size of the qual they're doing. For other learners, it's only £150. And at the same time, the area cost uplift goes up to reflect those increases, as well as the disadvantage uplift. So the highest disadvantage if you can get is about 33%. So you're taking a learner's postal code, adding 33%, say Central London, onto the value of a program, which might be 3,000, but with the £600, it's now 3,600. So this is a way in which the resource is being moved to reflect the needs of those older adults. So now you mustn't claim AB funding where the learners are already funded through an advanced loan that are in the side in the level the level 20 that are in the level 3 offer. 23, by the way, that 2 should be got rid of. But I think this has got some implications. Quite a lot of those learners would have traditionally applied for a loan. Now, within the level 3 adult offer, you've got to check again with Ascentis which of their level 3 quals are inside the offer and which are not. I think the big implications is that for a lot of learners, particularly access programs, have not been designated within that 400 fully funded list of courses, which I think has got implications. And some devolved authorities have tried to add other quals to that list. The other thing to note, by the way, is that traineeships, can I just check how many of you are currently offering traineeships? A couple, right? Okay. Thank you. I think the government's put 2 big additional slots of funding, both of them to possibly increase the number of the take-up in each year by at least 30,000. What we'll note is that the flexibilities, there's an investment that goes in through the AEB for those that are over the age of 19. But that's 19 and over, sorry. But also that level 3 learners are now entitled to go on a traineeship. Before, the highest level of pre-qualification was a level 2. You don't have to do 100 hours, it can be 70 hours, and it can be with more than one employer. But we want to make sure that whatever you're offering in a traineeship is a line of sight through to an occupational standard, the word is an apprenticeship. And that's very important because we've got to see that job there as an outcome. If you're using the AEB, either as a college or as a training provider, local authority, then there is now a new rate for older learners. The 19 to 24 rate for work preparation and work experience is 1,500. English, maths, and digital skills are separately funded, as is, for example, if you did an Ascentis employability skills certificate, or if it was longer, diploma. But each one of those is separately funded. The elements which are fully funded are the work preparation, the English, the maths, the digital skills. The what we call the flexum element is not necessarily fully funded. It depends on the circumstances of the individual learner. For example, are they unemployed, or if they're in the 19 to 23 age group, and this is equivalent to a first full level 2. Of course, that would have to be fairly big. Those employers who offer traineeships also get an incentive payment of £1,000 per trainee, up to 10 learners per region. So big employers could, if they've got learners in each one of the 9 regions in England, they could have up to 90 fully funded learners and also receive £91,000 incentive payments. And that's to pay for those different costs. Traineeship, by the way, can now be longer than 6 months. It can be up to 12 months. But again, most of we're a major provider of traineeships. Ours are usually somewhere between 12 weeks and 26 weeks. So 12 weeks to 6 months. But it can be longer if the learners need. So again, if you've got any questions about traineeships, just have a chat with our colleagues at Ascentis or myself, and I'll give you a bit more information on them. On that specific question, by the way, about ESOL, I'll have to research the answer before I can answer that question, but thanks for putting that question to me. So what's the big, if you want, elephant in the room? It's Skills for Jobs white paper, and of course now a bill that's being presented to Parliament. I think it's got its second reading in the House of Lords. Essentially, although it's an FE bill, I think it's got implications beyond the college sector. I think it affects all providers of adult learning in England. It's got these 5, if you want, planks of reform. These are 5 areas of reform: putting employers at the heart of the system, providing the highest technical skills, flexible lifetime skills guarantee, much more responsive and accountable model, including a new model of intervention, and supporting outstanding teaching. And I just wanted to just say a couple of things, because I think these got big implications beyond 2021-22. First of all, if we're going to pilot these things called the local skills improvement plans, that's employers at the heart of adult skills. I think the chambers will be the ones which will lead on these. They'll identify local labour market skills needs, but they'll be working with you, including, colleges, providers, local authorities, hopefully, to identify duplication, gaps, and investment priorities. But they'll be primarily employer-led. So we need more level 2 plumbers. We need more level 3, health and social care in our area. What about those individuals who say, well, I don't want to do those. I'd like to learn, I'd like to go into performing arts. I'd like to do media studies. I'd like to do humanities. And I think there's going to be a bit of a clash there. I think that's got implications for us. Now, I think these skills accelerators, which will be pilots of local skills improvement plans led by chambers, might be identifying where the new skills are, on the assumption that you'll still continue, if you're already an AEB funded provider, to continue to deliver the bulk of what you're doing in terms of English, maths, the entitlements, etc. But we have to wait and see. We have to see how these accelerators or these pilots operate. So wait and see that one. But I think that could be a double pull, a dichotomy. I think also providing the advanced technical and higher skills that the nation needs, wonderful. The major focus is on level 3 and above, particularly on developing a bigger offer at level 4 and 5 that's available from us. But what about those people who learn the entry and level 1 first, and those who need to get the level 2 first, as well as those who need the basic skills? And what about those occupations, such as health and social care catering, where a lot of the jobs are at level 2 and that's the bulk of them? And if you're a provider which meets the needs of that particular market, that might be the bulk of your adult learners. So I think there are some areas of exception that I think we need to pick up here, that we've got some concerns as a sector about. And that's why the AOC and ALP, there are very, very specific needs that are working there. In terms of swaps, the actual codes that you use for sector-based work academies, again, that's on the, if you look at the ILR support manual, it tells you what the particular codes are that you can use for them, particularly if you're using employability skills as part of the actual delivery. And that will be, of course, for any learners that are procured since or will be procured from the beginning of August this year. It will be a slightly different set of arrangements to those that were obviously in learning before the end of July. I think we've got a big issue about the emphasis on level 3 and above. We know it's important for productivity, etc., but what about all those other adults that we need of? I think the flexible lifetime skills guarantee is a really good idea. It's going to take a lot of thinking through. And this should be seen at the same time as we're looking at what's happening in terms of HE and HE finance. I think the idea of adults having, for the rest of their lives, from the age of 19 onwards, the opportunity to undertake a type of learning which suits their needs, which could be flexible, more modular, at levels 4 and 5 is wonderful, and not necessarily have to go to university or follow that more traditional HE route. So I think there's some opportunities there. But what we need are the stepping stones to get to level 4 and 5, which of course would be at level entry level, level 1, 2, and 3. I think the only other thing that we should be aware of as providers is, and this is particularly for those of you working in colleges, is that there are new powers that are being proposed. This would be legislated in terms of intervention if, for example, providers don't meet the skills priorities, or if providers have got real performance issues. So something to watch out. As I said, I think it's got very important implications for the funding of adult skills in future. So I'll pick up some of those questions in more detail, if I may do, in terms of ESOL, and also the code that for your employability skills within a swap. But I think if there are any other questions coming your way, let me just finish with a couple of words about how Ascentis can help to enhance your adult learner provision in the light of these changes. But if you look at the opportunities, legal entitlements, first level 2, first level 3, English, maths, essential digital skills, local flexibilities, and in devolved authorities, which might have their own individual needs. For adults working in the workplace, think about their opportunities there. Part of your employability skills offer, something we'll be looking at in the next Ascentis webinar. Pre-entry learners, I think there's still a big demand around basic skills, ESOL. You can integrate all of this into your ESOL offer, so ESOL Plus, for example, essential digital skills, employability skills, enterprise. I think you've got to be really focusing on making part of your offer very much responsive to employer skills shortages, because they are going to be in the driving seat of these learning local skills improvement plans and agendas, and also in your offer to the unemployed, particularly as we move out of COVID. So hopefully that's something that's given you a bit more information, knowledge. Are there any more questions, Marek?
Just checking through now. I can't see anything that we've missed, but again, it's probably better to put it back out to the participants. So if there is anything that we've missed, then feel free to get in touch with us and we can take it offline. But I think we've covered everything there, Beej.
Yeah, well, I'll pick up the point that Angelique, and also is it Gitanjali? I'll pick up the particular question that you've raised, and I'll just have to check, because I don't want to give you an answer that might mislead you at this stage on that very specific issue. Thank you. Thanks for that. Thank you. Mumtaz, I think traineeships for ESOL is a brilliant idea, because think about the route into employment for a lot of people has got to be through a work placement. So an ESOL can take the place of English inside a traineeship. I think it's a very good idea, particularly if you know that you've got employers that would be already lining up people who maybe just need a little bit what I'd call a finishing touch, for whom a work experience plus maybe an employability skills or a short technical qual would be really helpful. And ESOL can be very much part of that offer, as well as maybe the digital skills. So I'd definitely go for that, Mumtaz. Brilliant. And if you want any more information, please, from my colleagues, not only my details there, but I've got Francis's and Alexander's, Alex's details there. Get in touch with them, because they'll certainly be able to give you more information on some of those specific things we talked about, not only the essential digital skills, but also in terms of the access to HE diplomas and any of the other employability skills, etc., that might be of help to you.
Superb. Would you like me to stop the recording?
Yeah, if we stop the recording. Well, thanks very much, everyone, for joining in and being patient. And thanks for all the questions and comments. And again, thanks to our Ascentis for supporting today's webinar.